I never meant to fall for her, but the night my friend's mom whispered, "Tonight, forget him. You belong to me," everything changed. I've known her for years, though always at a careful distance. To me, she was simply my friend's mom, the woman who opened the door when I came over, who asked if we'd eaten, who reminded her son not to stay out too late. And yet, even in those simple moments, I noticed things I couldn't admit to anyone: the way she carried herself with quiet confidence, the calmness in her voice, the way her eyes seemed to hold entire stories she never spoke aloud. There was a weight about her, something unspoken, that drew me in long before I understood why. At 23, I told myself it was just admiration. After all, she was older, wiser, settled into a life far different from mine. She had a grace about her that girls my age didn't, a kind of stillness that came only from experience. And yet, whenever I was in her presence, I caught myself noticing the little things: the faint trace of her perfume that lingered in the hallway after she passed, the way her hand rested lightly on the frame of the kitchen door, as though she was holding back words she never let escape, the soft lilt of her laugh when something truly caught her off guard. Most times, we never spoke more than pleasantries. Hello? A smile, maybe a brief question about school or work. But even in those brief exchanges, I felt something stir, like there was an invisible current running between us, one I couldn't touch yet couldn't ignore. She had a way of looking at people that made them feel seen. It was never too long, never too direct, just enough to leave you wondering what she might be thinking. And when her eyes lingered on me, even for a second longer than expected, my chest would tighten in a way I couldn't explain. I often caught myself wondering if she ever noticed me the same way. Did she see me as anything more than her son's friend? Or was it only me, caught up in thoughts I had no business entertaining? Still, I couldn't shake the memory of small, fleeting moments: the light brush of her hand against my shoulder as she passed behind me in the kitchen, the way she said my name with a softness no one else did, the faint warmth in her smile when she thought no one was looking. These were tiny, almost invisible gestures. To anyone else, they meant nothing. To me, they meant everything. And so, over the years, a quiet weight settled between us. It wasn't spoken, never acted upon, never even acknowledged. But it was there, humming softly beneath the surface every time we found ourselves alone in a room. At the time, I didn't realize how much that unspoken weight would come to matter. I didn't know it would change the way I looked at her, or the way she would one day look at me. It happened one evening in the simplest of ways, without planning, without intention. I had stopped by the house as I often did, expecting only to spend a couple of hours with my friend. But life, as it tends to, had other plans. A call came through, urgent enough that he left in a hurry, tossing an apology over his shoulder as he disappeared out the door. And just like that, it was only her and me. I stood there awkwardly, unsure whether I should excuse myself as well. But she glanced back at me from the kitchen, one eyebrow raised, and said with a quiet smile, "You might as well stay. It'd be a shame to waste a table already set." I wanted to protest, to say it might be inappropriate, but the words caught in my throat. Something about the way she looked at me, calm, steady, almost amused, made it impossible to refuse. So I nodded and slipped into the chair at the dining table. The room felt different without my friend there, as if the walls themselves understood the change. The faint hum of the refrigerator was louder, the clink of cutlery against porcelain sharper. She moved gracefully, pouring 2 glasses of wine, setting one in front of me before taking her seat across the table. We began with small talk, safe topics, like work, the weather, her son's unpredictable habits. But underneath the words, I felt something heavier. Every time I lifted my eyes, hers seemed to linger a little too long before darting away. The candlelight on the table flickered, catching the edges of her face, softening the lines around her eyes. She looked different in that light, less like the motherly figure I'd known for years, and more like a woman quietly carrying her own mysteries. Halfway through the meal, she passed me a dish. Our fingers brushed, just for a second, barely more than a whisper of contact. But that single touch sent an unexpected spark up my arm, sharp enough that I almost dropped the fork in my hand. She noticed. I could see it in the way her lips parted slightly, in the small breath she drew in before returning to her plate. Neither of us mentioned it, yet the silence that followed was charged, thicker than before. I tried to focus on the meal, on the conversation, on anything that might steady the ground beneath me. But it was impossible not to notice the way her voice softened when she spoke to me, the way her gaze sometimes lingered on my face as if she were studying me in ways she never had before. The meal ended, but neither of us moved. The plates sat forgotten, the wineglasses nearly empty. There was no rush, no urgency, only a quiet awareness that something had shifted. The air between us was no longer filled with casual politeness. Instead, it pulsed with an unspoken question neither of us dared to voice. And as I sat across from her in that dimly lit room, I realized this was the first time I had ever truly been alone with her. And it felt far more dangerous than I had ever imagined. After dinner, she suggested we move to the living room. The plates remained untouched on the table, but neither of us seemed to care. I followed her, carrying my half-finished glass of wine, and settled into the sofa while she sat a careful distance away. The television stayed dark, the room quiet except for the faint hum of the night outside. For a while, we spoke about ordinary things, my studies, my uncertain plans, the places she once dreamed of visiting but never had. Yet, as the minutes slipped by, our words grew slower, heavier, until they stopped circling around safe topics and began to drift into something deeper. She asked me questions no one else ever bothered with. Do you feel happy where you are? Do you ever feel stuck? Her eyes didn't leave mine as she spoke, and I realized she wasn't just asking about me. She was speaking of herself, wrapped in the safety of indirect words. There was a pause before she continued, her voice softer now, almost fragile. Sometimes I wonder if anyone really sees me anymore. The sentence hung in the air, heavier than anything she had said before. I felt my chest tighten at the quiet ache in her tone. Here was a woman who, to everyone else, seemed composed and steady, yet beneath that exterior was a loneliness she could no longer hide. I shifted closer, unsure of what I was allowed to offer. My hand hovered near hers, hesitant, before I finally let it rest gently on top. For a heartbeat, I expected her to pull away. Instead, her fingers curled beneath mine, holding on with a kind of quiet desperation that startled me. I see you. I found myself saying, the words escaping before I could stop them. My voice sounded rougher than usual, weighed down with truth. She turned then, fully, her face only inches from mine. In her eyes was something unguarded, something I wasn't sure I had ever been meant to see. They glistened faintly, as though she had been holding back tears for far too long. It feels good, she whispered, to be noticed. The silence that followed was not empty, it was alive, filled with a tension neither of us knew how to name. Her thumb brushed lightly across the back of my hand, a small gesture, yet it sent a ripple through me so strong I had to steady my breath. I wanted to say more, to offer her comfort, but the words tangled inside me. Instead, we sat there, hands joined, hearts speaking in ways our voices couldn't. For the first time, I saw her not just as my friend's mom, not just as the woman who carried herself with grace, but as someone vulnerable, yearning, and deeply human. And I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, in that moment, she saw me differently too. The weight of her confession lingered between us like a fragile thread, holding us in place. My hand still rested over hers, the warmth of her skin steady and grounding, though I could feel the faint tremor in her fingers. We weren't speaking anymore, but the silence wasn't empty, it was charged, almost humming, as though the room itself was listening. Her eyes searched mine, not with the casual ease of conversation, but with an intensity that made it hard to breathe. I'd never been looked at like that before. It wasn't a glance, it wasn't polite, it was a gaze that reached into me, pulling at things I hadn't dared to admit, even to myself. She shifted slightly closer, closing the careful distance she had always kept between us. The soft brush of her knee against mine was barely there, yet it sent a jolt through me, sharp and undeniable. I didn't move. I couldn't. Her breath came out uneven, quiet but heavy, and then she leaned in, so close I could feel the warmth of her presence. Her voice, when it came, was not steady, it trembled, but there was something deliberate beneath the tremor, something she could no longer hold back. "Tonight," she whispered, each word slow, fragile, yet carrying a weight that pierced through me. "Forget him. You belong to me." The words struck me like a wave, impossible to ignore, impossible to retreat from. For a moment, I was suspended between disbelief and something far more dangerous, the deep, aching recognition that I wanted what she was offering, even if I couldn't say it out loud. I felt my pulse thundering in my chest, louder than the silence that surrounded us. I wanted to answer, to reach for words that could make sense of everything spiraling between us, but my mouth stayed closed. Instead, I let my body speak in ways my voice could not. I leaned ever so slightly toward her, my forehead almost brushing hers. She didn't move back. Her hand slipped from beneath mine only to find its way to my wrist, fingers curling gently around it, holding me there as though anchoring herself to something real. I could feel the faint tremble of her breath against my cheek, the warmth of her presence filling every inch of space between us. And in that fragile closeness, I realized this wasn't just a confession of desire, it was a plea. She wasn't asking me to replace her son, or to break some boundary we both knew existed. She was asking me to see her, to choose her, even just for this moment. I closed my eyes briefly, steadying the storm inside me, before whispering back, not words, but a soft sound that carried agreement, surrender, and longing all at once. When I opened my eyes again, she was still there, her gaze fixed on me, her lips parted just slightly as if she, too, was caught between fear and relief. For a long, suspended moment after her whisper, we simply sat there, still, uncertain, yet bound by something neither of us dared to name. My heart was hammering in my chest, every beat echoing in my ears, and I knew she could feel it too from the closeness of where we sat. I didn't answer with words. Words felt too fragile, too clumsy for what was unfolding between us. Instead, I let instinct guide me. Slowly, carefully, I reached across the space and slipped my arm around her shoulders. She hesitated, just for a breath, as though the weight of years and unspoken rules pressed down on her. But then, with a quiet exhale, she let herself lean into me. Her head came to rest against my chest, the soft brush of her hair against my chin, her cheek settling just above my heartbeat. I hadn't expected the embrace to feel so natural, so inevitable. Her arms came around my waist, tentative at first, then firmer, holding me with a steadiness that spoke of everything she had kept hidden. It wasn't the embrace of someone seeking passion, it was the embrace of someone seeking refuge. I closed my eyes, letting the silence stretch. In that stillness, I could feel everything, the gentle rhythm of her breathing, the faint steadiness of her heartbeat aligning with mine, the warmth of her body melting against me as though she had been carrying too much for too long, and had finally found a place to set it down. I didn't rush. I didn't move beyond holding her. My hand rested lightly on her back, fingers tracing small, absent circles through the fabric of her blouse. It wasn't about claiming her. It was about reassuring her that she wasn't alone, that I was right there, unflinching. Her voice, when it finally came, was muffled against my chest. "I shouldn't feel this way," she whispered, more to herself than to me. Her words trembled, but her grip on me tightened, betraying the truth she couldn't deny. I tilted my head, resting my chin gently against her hair. "Then don't think about it," I murmured, barely more than a breath. "Just let yourself feel." Her shoulders shivered, a small, almost imperceptible tremor, and then she sighed, a long, unguarded release that seemed to carry years of unspoken longing. She pressed closer, as though anchoring herself in that moment, in me. Time blurred. I couldn't tell if we sat like that for minutes or hours. All I knew was that the embrace shifted something deep inside both of us. It wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, steady, and profoundly real. When she finally drew back, it wasn't far. Just enough to look up at me, her eyes searching mine with a vulnerability I had never seen in her before. I could still feel the warmth of her hands resting at my sides, reluctant to let go. And in her gaze I understood, this wasn't a fleeting slip of emotion. This was the beginning of something neither of us could ignore. The embrace had shifted something between us, yet when she finally leaned back, it wasn't with regret. There was hesitation, yes, an awareness of the line we had crossed, but no attempt to erase it. She stayed close, her hand brushing against my arm as though she needed the reassurance of continued contact. We didn't speak of what had just happened. Instead, she rose quietly, collected the empty glasses from the table, and returned with a blanket draped over one arm. Without a word, she spread it across the sofa, settling beside me once again. It was such a simple act, yet it felt strangely intimate, as though she was drawing a small world around us, one meant only for the two of us. The night outside pressed gently against the windows, a steady hum of silence broken only by the faint rustle of fabric as she shifted closer. Our shoulders touched first, accidentally, perhaps, though either of us pulled away. The warmth of that single point of contact spread quickly, filling me with an awareness of her that was impossible to ignore. We talked then, not about rules or regrets, but about life. She told me stories from when she was younger, memories she rarely shared, dreams she once chased, mistakes she made along the way, moments that shaped the woman she had become. I listened, drawn in not only by her words but by the softness in her voice, the way her eyes brightened when she spoke of things that mattered to her. At times we laughed. Genuine laughter, the kind that makes the air lighter, that momentarily erases the weight of everything unsaid. It was strange, how easily we slipped into that rhythm, as if we'd been keeping this part of ourselves hidden for years, waiting for a night like this to let it out. Every now and then, our hands would brush on the blanket between us. Each time it happened, the air tightened just a little more. I could feel the question lingering there, would she pull away, or would she let the moment last? She never withdrew. If anything, her fingers began to linger a fraction longer, until finally they stayed, resting lightly against mine. The contact was simple, almost innocent, yet it carried more meaning than anything else that night. The warmth of her hand was steady, her thumb grazing once, just once, across the back of mine. The gesture was subtle, but it left me breathless. I didn't try to take it further. Neither did she. We both seemed to understand that what we were building was fragile, delicate. To rush it would be to shatter it. So we let the closeness linger, unspoken but deeply felt. By the time the clock neared midnight, the room was quiet again. She had leaned back slightly, her head tilted so it almost brushed my shoulder, her eyes heavy with something between contentment and longing. I watched her in the dim light, memorizing the lines of her face, the way she softened when she let her guard down. The night slipped away quietly, unnoticed, until the first light of dawn began to soften the edges of the room. At some point, our conversation had faded into silence, our bodies sinking into the comfort of simply being near one another. She had rested her head against my shoulder, her breathing slow, and though sleep never fully claimed us, we lingered in that half-dreaming state where time feels suspended. When the morning finally made itself known, it wasn't abrupt. The pale light filtered through the curtains, brushing her skin with a faint glow. She stirred beside me, shifting slightly, her hair grazing against my arm as she straightened. For a moment, she looked disoriented, as though unsure of how much she had let herself reveal in the night. Then her gaze found mine, and the vulnerability there was almost too much to hold. Neither of us spoke right away. There was a heaviness to the silence, not uncomfortable, but filled with the knowledge that something had changed forever. We weren't who we had been yesterday. Finally, she rose, moving with the slow grace of someone reluctant to break the spell. I followed, standing a step behind as she led the way toward the front door. The house was still, the quiet of morning wrapping around us like a secret. At the door, she turned to face me. Her hands hesitated before lifting, then cupped my face with a tenderness that stopped me where I stood. Her palms were warm, her touch steady, though her eyes glistened with emotions she was struggling to contain. She leaned in, not quickly, not boldly, but with the soft deliberation of someone giving a piece of themselves away. Her lips brushed against my cheek, A kiss that lingered just long enough to leave its imprint, both physical and unshakable. "Don't forget this," she whispered, her voice low, steady despite the tremor beneath it. "Even if no one else ever knows, don't forget." Her words carved themselves into me, deeper than I could have imagined. I wanted to answer, to tell her I couldn't possibly forget, that I didn't want to. But instead, I only nodded, my hand lifting to cover hers where it still rested against my cheek. The silence between us spoke louder than anything I could have said. She let her hands fall slowly, lingering for one last second before stepping back. Her smile was faint, touched with sadness but also with something softer, acceptance, perhaps, or hope. As I stepped outside, the cool air met me like a reminder of reality. Yet, even as the door closed gently behind me, I carried with me the warmth of her touch, the weight of her whisper, the memory of a night that had shifted the ground beneath us both.